Hello, my name is Vijay. Welcome to the next session on how to capture beautiful pictures. In this video, we'll learn about exposure. Photography is about capturing the light, showing or hiding desired details. Exposure is about the desired amount of light reaching camera sensor. There is no one perfect exposure. A scene can be exposed in many ways. A properly exposed photograph will have the desired effect that the photographer wishes to convey and will have enough details in bright and dark areas. Details are lost in an improperly exposed image. What is exposure? The amount of light that reaches the camera sensor varies based on source of the light, either it is natural such as sun or artificial such as flash light. The distance, direction and quality of the light, and as a photographer how much light you want to let in. The light in a scene or on the subject in a photograph creates a varying range of colors, bright areas or highlights to dark areas or shadows. Too much light creates bright areas and results in pure white color at extremes. Details in the highlighted areas will be lost, resulting in an overexposed image. Low light creates dark areas and results in pure black color at extremes. Details in the shadows lost in an underexposed image. Image with proper exposure will have enough details in both the highlights and the shadows. Getting a perfect exposure is about photographer's intention of what to convey and having enough details in highlights and shadows in the image. Observe the three images taken at different exposures. The first image is underexposed because of low light. The details in the darkest areas of the scene are lost. The second image in the middle has the desired exposure. There are enough details in both the bright and dark areas. The third image in the right is overexposed due to the bright light. Details lost in the highlights or bright areas. Camera controls available for adjusting exposure. Aperture. The wide you open your lens, lower aperture number, the more light reaches sensor. And the narrower you open your lens, higher aperture numbers, the lesser light reaches the sensor. The side effects of this: lower apertures will have a shallow depth of the field, meaning lesser area of the photo will be in sharp focus. Higher apertures will have a deeper depth of the field, meaning more area of the photo will be in sharp focus. The shutter speed. Shutter speed is the amount of time the shutter is open. Slow shutter speeds let in more light as the shutter remains open for a longer duration. Fast shutter speeds let in less light as shutter is open for a shorter duration. The side effects of shutter speed. Slow shutter speeds will create a motion blur which may or may not be desired. Slow shutter speeds also cannot freeze action or may introduce blurriness due to handshake or produce soft images. Another setting available for controlling exposure is ISO. Unlike aperture or shutter, ISO does not control the amount of light reaching the sensor. ISO amplifies the signal that was already received by the camera sensor. It used to be about film sensitivity in traditional film cameras. For digital cameras, it is more about amplifying the received signal by software. The side effects of ISO. High ISO does allow to shoot in low light conditions but introduces noise in the picture. How to get the desired exposure? Exposure is about getting the correct amount of light to capture enough details in highlights and shadows. Digital camera DSLRs, including mobile phones, do a better job of giving correct exposure automatically, but that may or may not be the exposure you desire as a photographer. The amount of light that reaches the sensor is controlled by two camera controls, aperture and shutter, as discussed before. On DSLR cameras, aperture and shutter are visible controls. On mobile, please check settings or advanced options or pro settings, since mobiles have fixed lenses and there may not be a choice on aperture sizes. ISO can be used in low light situations, but be cautious since it's only about doubling the light signal received by sensor and not about sensor receiving more light. An example of a pro settings on a mobile camera. This particular mobile has metering, ISO, shutter, exposure, focusing points and white balance controls. and no aperture setting. Please refer your camera. If it is a mobile camera, please check your settings. Observe this image. The flower is lit by a harsh sunlight blowing out all the highlights and is overexposed, but the background is properly exposed. So when there is an even light in a scene, move around, try to find a position which would give you even light. Put a shadow over the flower so that it is not overexposed. Wait for a different time of the day. Select high apertures or low shutter to let in less light. Lower ISO to a minimum. In general, it's not possible to recover details from an overexposed image with blown out highlights. It is better to underexpose an image by a point or two. Details cannot be recovered in an overexposed image. Observe these three images. These images demonstrate challenges in getting desired exposure in unevenly lit scenes. The image on the left has uneven light between the two toys as they are placed at different distances from the source of the light. The pink bear in foreground receives bright light, exposing it correctly, making the blue toy in the background underexposed. The image in the middle is lit with even light as both are at the same distance from the source of light. Both toys are exposed properly. The image in the right is lit with uneven light again as the toys are placed at different distances from the light source. Exposing the blue toy correctly overexposed the pink toy. Bright scenes are challenging to get desired exposure. Not only unevenly lit scenes, but bright scenes are challenging as well to get desired exposure with enough details. The image in the left is underexposed, while a properly exposed scene will look like the image in the right. Again, underexposing the image a bit, 1 or 2 stops will help. The brightness in the image can be opened or adjusted in editing. Similar to unevenly lit, brightly lit scenes, low light scenes are challenging as well. Observe both the images. The one on left is underexposed, but the desired exposure of the image is on the right. Lower shutter speeds, wide open aperture or higher ISO will help in low light scenes, but note that each of these adjustments will have its own side effects. For example, a high ISO will result in noise in the photograph. So be careful about making a trade-off. Extreme situations are always challenging. Take a moment to observe the images in the next few slides and think about what is the desired exposure you want to see as a photographer. Observe the images again. Spend a minute and think about what is the desired exposure in these images. Observe the images and think about what is the desired exposure in these images. Which one of these photographs do you like? The one on the left or the one on the right? What is a proper exposure depends on what the photographer wishes to convey. There is no correct exposure. There is only a desired exposure. Learn to identify what works and what doesn't in different scenarios. Extreme light conditions are always challenging to get desired exposure. It is up to the photographer to balance what he or she desires. The camera might not be able to help in making that decision for you. So to summarize, exposure is about the desired amount of light reaching the camera sensor. A properly exposed image with sufficient details will convey the photographer's desired effect. Aperture and shutter speeds help us to control the exposure. ISO setting can be used to improve exposure. Make note of side effects of using aperture, shutter and ISO in extreme light conditions. Getting a proper exposure is a challenge in extreme light conditions and unevenly lit scenes. There is no correct exposure. There is only a desired exposure and wrong exposure. So here is the assignment. Shoot 10 photographs in and around your surroundings. While shooting, keep in mind the principle discussed so far and the principle discussed today, which is exposure. Review the images on a larger screen. Did you get the exposure right? Or did you get the exposure that you wanted to get? If not, repeat the process and practice. Thank you and have fun shooting images. If you enjoy watching the videos, please like, share or subscribe. Help others find the course. Thank you.